Alright guys, welcome back. We're gonna get down and dirty with scripting today. It's gonna get crazy, so I hope you are holding onto your seats and your hats and your fingers because you're gonna use them to code with. I'm in Unity here. This is the Trogdor game that I created, or am creating. It's pretty awesome. I'll hit play for you and you can see the awesomeness again. I feel like I should play music right here. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, that's enough of that. Nothing happens here. I've got no interaction, no control of the player. He just falls onto this cloud and kind of does his animation sequence, his idle sequence. But we need to give some interaction to him, right? And so how are we going to do that? You guessed it, coding. Get ready. So I'm going to hit this add component feature down here in the inspector. New script. I'm going to create a C# script, and I'm going to call it something very specific. I'm going to call it player controller. And I'll need that name. So, create an add. There we go. And now we have this. If I go to my project tab here, I now have this script here. I'm just going to real quick move it into a new folder. So I'll right click to create a new folder. And I'll call this scripts. Keep things organized. I'm going to keep telling you that every video because it's important. I'll move that into there. And then I'll double click on this and wait for it. There it goes. And it's going to open up something called MonoDevelop. It may also open up another script editor. You can use whatever editor you want, but I'm going to be using MonoDevelop. And I've got my background black here. You can do the same thing with yours. You go Tools, Options, and you scroll down here to, I believe it's syntax highlighting, and I'm on this nightshade theme right here. I like it. It's easier to read with that dark background, but you don't have to do that if you don't want. Okay, so it sets up some stuff for us already, and I'll try to slow down at this point. I'm excited, so I might speak fast, but this is me slowing it down. So up here you've got this using system collections generic, using Unity engine. There will come a time where you'll need to add to that, but for now we'll leave that just as it is. Then I've got this class here, public class, player controller, and then these two functions here, void start and void update. And this is initialization phase, so when the game starts it'll run this code in the beginning, and then every frame it runs this code here and update. Okay? A lot of this is not going to make sense to you. You're like, what does void mean? What does public mean? What is a class? Okay? We'll get into that, and we'll ease into that. I'll try to explain this to you, and you can just tell me if this confuses the tar out of you. Void is where a function runs and doesn't return anything. So this is a function. I'll put code in here, and I could make it a math function, and I could have it return the answer to what's 2 times 2, and it would return 2. That wouldn't be void. Void doesn't return anything. So that probably makes no sense to you right now, and that's okay. This public, though, will make sense in a bit because we'll be declaring public variables, and what that means is that I can view it in this inspector here, and it's available to the rest of this program. And we'll show you an example of that here in a bit, because we're going to be coding this character to interact to keyboard input. So let's get started with that. Let me get back to MonoDevelop here. I'll go full frame, and let's go ahead and start coding. I'm going to make some spaces here, and I'll try to add comments. To add comments in C#, it's just like in JavaScript, 2 slashes. That's what these comments are. I highly recommend you make comments to help yourself understand what we did and why we did it. So let's go ahead and type in. We're going to be using the rigid body, this rigid body game component right here. And we'll be accessing that and using that to move. We'll also be using something called user input. If I go over here to edit and project settings input, okay, so I've got this input manager here, and then this axes tab, and these are all the different axes I can access here. They're already set up for you. So for instance, I have a horizontal axis, so moving side to side, a vertical axis, fire buttons, all that stuff. We're going to be using this horizontal axis today and accessing it. Okay, let's get back to the code editor, and let's put in some code. I'm going to type rigid body 2D. Now remember, it's a rigid body 2D, so we need to select that. And you can see that MonoDevelop is giving me some hints as to what code to type here. It's a very useful feature. I'll double click that and it finishes it for me, my RB. Now, this rigid body is something that's built in. This is the name I'm giving it. Okay, so this is what type of game component it is, and this is my specific name that I just came up with right now. I could call it my RB is cool. Doesn't matter. I'm going to keep things short and simple, and I'll try to make variable names that make sense, and you should too. For following along with this, it's best that you just keep your variable names the exact same as mine. Okay, I'm going to create a bool. You may not know about data types yet, but a Boolean is a yes or no. It means on or off. That's all it is. So I'm going to say facing right equals true, because when my character first falls into the game, he is actually facing right. So facing right equals true. Okay, and something else to mention real quick. You see this little error here thing. It's not even an error. You can go ahead and hit OK. That's not a big deal. That'll pop up, and don't even worry about it. Okay, so I've got this variable here. Now I haven't assigned it any value yet. I've told it what kind it is. I've given it a name, but I haven't assigned it a value. So I'm going to go ahead and assign it a value in the start function. So I'll go ahead and type out my RB equals, and that's how we assign things in C# and many coding languages, get component, and this is an internal function call that I'm making, so that's why I'm getting all these suggestions. When I make my own name, the editor doesn't give me suggestions because it doesn't have any feedback for me, but when I'm typing in something that is an internal function, it'll give me a whole bunch of different options. And I just want this get component one right here, and then I'm going to go angle brackets, and I'm going to find that rigid body 2D that's on our game character, and then that's how I call the function right there, and that looks good. Okay, so now I've assigned a value to this variable that I declared, and that value is the rigid body 2D object that's on our character. Now I'm going to create a public variable, so this is public, which means it's available or exposed in the inspector, and I'm going to call it public float max speed. Now float, let me explain what a float is. It's really simple, and I don't know why they created all these crazy names for things, but you have an integer and you have a float. An integer is any whole number, so 1 or 10 or 100, and a float is any decimal number like 1.2 or 0.003. That's the only difference. So when you see float, just know it means it's a decimal placed number, and an integer is any whole number. It's that simple. And this public, watch what happens. I'm going to go ahead and save this code and go back into Unity. And let me click on my game character here, go down to this script that I created, and in this script component here, look, I now have max speed. Remember how I created that in code? And now it's exposed right here, and I can give this a value, like 10, for instance. Now nothing's going to happen because we still haven't made our character move, but this max speed is what we'll be using to help make our character move, and you'll see that later. So I'm going to go back to the code real quick. Let's keep coding. Okay, so I've assigned this value here. Now in update, which happens every frame, this is going to check your interaction every frame. So we need to get that horizontal axis using input. So I'm going to create another float. Move is equal to input dot get axis horizontal. And you remember we looked, and I'll go there again in edit, project settings, input, and that's how we found this horizontal axis. So we're accessing that right now. So you see how there's kind of bullet points here? I've got axes, then horizontal. I could also access the vertical, fire, any one of these axes I could access using what is called dot notation. So I've got input dot get axes. So I've got input, which I selected using edit, project settings, input dot horizontal or dot axes, and then I grabbed horizontal. So that dot notation, you'll see it all over in coding. It probably doesn't make a ton of sense right now, and that's okay. But just realize that this is like the first component, and then down further on, you have this component or function or feature. You'll see that a lot. So we'll keep going. Let's actually make something happen with our character. All this boring coding, I don't want it to make you bored. Okay, so next, we're going to take our myRB, and we're going to give it a value, something called a new vector 2. Now, vector is something used in game math. Some of you that are familiar with Illustrator or SVGs on the web might be thinking about vector graphics. This is different. This is vector math, and we'll get into it more, I'm sure, as the semester or year goes on. But for right now, follow along with me. I realize that a lot of the stuff I'm saying is going completely over your head. I promise you, though, the first time I saw code, it went completely over my head as well. And that's probably the same story that any coder would ever tell you. It doesn't make sense at first, but the more you dive into it, the more you start to understand code, the cooler you become, I promise. Soon you'll be like Superman or Batman or Spider-Man or Wonder Woman. Something cool. Anyway, I'm going to move on because I'm obviously dragging this out. So, new vector 2, I'm going to take and make move times max speed. Now, with this vector, this might make a little more sense if you guys know about x and y values. So, there's an x-axis and there's a y-axis. So, what I'm doing here on this vector 2 is I'm creating an x value. So my x value will be move times max speed. So to get move, we gathered the information that's being input from the keyboard using the horizontal axes. So if someone hits a button, it's going to return positive or negative values for whether we want the character to go left or right. So this is going to give me a number. It's going to be assigned to this variable move. So now this move translates into a number. It'll be either negative or positive. I'm going to multiply that number times max speed. Max speed is this public variable we created right here. This number we type in ourselves right in the inspector. Let me go back to the character. That's the number we put here, max speed. Okay? So it's not, I just want to demystify things for you a little bit. So a number is going to be created here and multiplied times this number. And then I'm adding a comma here. I don't want to change anything on the y-axis. Y is up and down, so like jumping. I'm not going to change that with this. We'll do jumping coding later. Right now we're just worried about left and right movement, so I'll leave it the same. So how do I do that? Well, I just go myRB.velocity.y. So that will just leave it the exact same, okay? But I have to have these two values in here to make the vector 2 work, all right? And if all is correct here, we can go ahead and go back to our game and hit play. And then all compiler errors have to be fixed before you can enter play mode. How exciting. I'm going to hit this console button here, and we can just look through this code here. It may or may not make sense. I don't know if you can read it right here, but it says cannot implicitly convert type Unity Engine.vector2 to Unity Engine.rigidbody 2D. So I need to go through and look through the code and do some bug testing here. But one thing that will be helpful, because you're going to get these errors a ton. It just happens all the time. One thing I can do is see this line 22 here. That helps me out a lot. So I can go back to my code and look at line 22 and realize it's talking about this. Something I did here is not working out right. And after looking at my code, I paused it for like 5 seconds. It was really easy, actually. I needed to access the velocity feature on myRB. So I needed to go dot velocity. And I totally spaced it when we were typing it out. And I got to spell it right. All right, perfect. So now this code should work like a charm. Let's go ahead and press play and wait for it. There's my character. He falls in place. Now I'm going to push the left arrow He goes backwards, and the forward arrow, and he goes forwards like a charm. Let's make him jump off this backwards. Oh yes, that was worth it right there. All that coding just for that. Are you excited? You should be. Okay, so there's a lot of things I need to fix, right? One of the things that's obvious is when I hit the left arrow, I want him to turn around. So that's going to take some more coding. And you know what? We're going to get into that on the next session, and we'll knock that out real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and stop here so it doesn't get too long, and I will see you in the next video.